projected. Great.
Yep.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. And I think I have spoken to some of the cities who are present here in different capacities. I've definitely been in contact with Maryland Energy Administration as well. So I'm really glad to see all of you on the call. And I want to give a bit of a background on how this plug-in solar movement started. I think it's pretty exciting just how quickly we're moving. As I mentioned, we started operations in January 2025, and at that point, there wasn't any plug-in solar basically anywhere across the U.S. And we just, combined with how much electricity prices are going up across the United States, and taking into account that even as of this year, only about 7% of American homes have residential rooftop solar. Uh, the widening gap or contrast with what is happening in Europe, especially, in Germany, where we're seeing all of these new plug-in solar systems pop up all over the place, and the huge uptake, it just made us ask, why is this not happening in the U.S. and what's keeping this from being rolled out? And when we dove into the matter more profoundly, what we really saw is that there's so many different factors, particularly in the legislative side, that we're keeping this technology from really mass adoption in the United States. And so our mission and what we're working on at Bright Saber is basically to get rid of all of the hurdles that are preventing plug-in solar from becoming a household name, from being something that each and every American can access and touch with their own hands. We estimate that as high as 70% of Americans can't access rooftop solar at this point, whether because they have unsuitable roofs, because they can't afford the $20,000 to $40,000 upfront costs, or because they're renters or live in multifamily residence. And for us, we look at this as a key solution, especially now with expiring federal tax credits. We think this could put residential solar even more out of reach and decrease demand there. And I think this is kind of a silver lining there too. Okay, how do we bridge that gap and take advantage of this new technology to really transform the U.S. clean energy paradigm? And so this is where we started, and just kind of a brief overview of what plug-in solar is. Plug-in solar systems are about 5 to 20 times smaller than a traditional rooftop system. And they are small systems, often consisting of between 1 and 4 panels that you can install on a balcony, a terrace, or a backyard. We're even seeing people in Germany put some small systems in their windowsills. And so it's a really a new, much smaller version of a rooftop system that, as opposed to rooftop, where usually that is wired directly to your home's circuit breaker, plug-in systems are plugged directly into a regular electricity outlet in your home, and they feed energy directly back into your outlet, into the wiring that runs back to the breaker box, and it powers other circuits on your breaker box and other appliances that are connected to the same circuit. And the value of these systems is that they take way quicker, way less time to install. And they're also way cheaper than rooftop. We estimate between 80 to 98% cheaper than rooftop systems. And, taking also the context of Electrify DC's work and a lot of the initiatives on electrification that have been discussed, I think modest estimates put that a complete household transition to full electrification can increase electricity demand up to 3 times. And so for us, we look at plug-in solar also as one of these options that can help to offset the increased electricity demand. Of course, over a long time, you'll save electricity money and you'll with more energy efficiency. But we think that pairing plug-in solar also with electrification initiatives is a really exciting perspective that's popped up across a bunch of states. And like I mentioned, now this is a very kind of widely uptaken technology in Germany. We estimate as many as 4 million houses, or 10% of houses in Germany have this. And really, this didn't require any expensive subsidies from the government. It didn't require any tax credits. What it really required is that deregulation and kind of policies and regulations getting out of the way from mass uptake. And so, kind of like what was happening in Germany, this is what we're trying to do in the US now, because the first domino that was passed in Germany in 2020 that started making this much more feasible is that a bill was passed that made it so that households that wanted to install these systems no longer had to set up an interconnection agreement with their utility and did not have to have a net metering agreement either. And so basically brought utilities out of the equation, being able to regulate or prohibit the use of these. And then what really enabled mass uptake a few years later was the focus on renters' rights and a bill that passed in Germany that basically said that landlords or HOAs cannot prohibit the use of these systems unless in very specific settings like historical maintenance. And so the policy hurdle we're trying to address in the US now, and which is actually advancing quite a bit well in each one of your cities slash DC, state slash DC, is we're trying to pass state by state legislation that gets these systems exempt from the interconnection rules that are preventing kind of a dramatic uptake, and also getting rid of all of the soft costs that really are what constitute still a huge burden on people who want to get residential solar. And it's working quite quickly. And I think just for, this is useful, but just to have an idea, our focus now, we're in NGOs, we're not, a business selling these, but because there are so few offerings in the US market right now, to bridge the gap, we have been piloting systems, especially in the Bay Area. And now we've rolled out a few hundred systems in the Bay Area. And we're focusing at this current point on these small sort of backyard and deck mounted systems that are between 2 to 4 panels, 400 watts. And they are plugged in, mounted, and then coordinated with your breaker, and they automatically are preventing or reducing the amount of electricity drawn from the grid. And what we're seeing now with the pilots we're running in California is up to 25% of homes' electricity usage is automatically covered each and every month, which is obviously a huge win, especially in states where electricity prices are skyrocketing. And I won't go into too much detail on this, but this is where we are at kind of legislatively. It's moved incredibly fast. We started in Utah earlier this year, and it started because we had an amazing Republican legislator in Utah, Republican Raymond Ward, who went to Europe and saw this and was looking all over the place in the US and said, why can't we have this? Like, this doesn't make any sense. This seems like a no-brainer. And the thing is, it is. And so we started with Utah, and it passed unanimously with no pushback from utilities or anybody else. And it just kind of showed like, this can be bipartisan. This can happen anywhere. It doesn't need to be that difficult. And then I think the big question since then was Utah an anomaly, or is this a national movement? And I think what we've proven in the last 6 months is it's for sure a national movement. And now we have 11 states where there's a publicly available bill, including in Virginia. Maryland also has this. And now what we've learned recently is that DC will be putting forward a bill on plug-in solar. So we're really excited. We think that in 2026, as many as 20 plus states could pass plug-in solar legislation, which is a really big deal because a lot of the work we're doing is on market enablement now. And a lot of manufacturers we spoke to said, look, I mean, we just need to have a certainty that there's a market for this for us to invest in developing these new products, because the US is on a separate electrical system. We can't use the systems that have been developed for the European market here. It needs to be something custom. And what they told us is, I think if we got legislation passed in 5 states, that'll be enough to kind of push us to developing this. And now I think we're going to far exceed that. And if you follow the news nationally, yesterday, California announced a bill, and even with a state as big as California or New York passing this, I mean, it's already kind of a windfall. And so we're really excited about what the next 6 months are going to bring in the US. And just kind of an update state by state. In Virginia, a bill has been introduced in both chambers. And the Chesapeake Climate Action Network is a key leader with us in this coalition to bring this bill forward. It's still being considered. In Maryland, we do have balcony legislation as part of the larger SREC reform bill to be introduced in this session. Although we still haven't seen the final draft of what the balcony portion of that bill will look like. And then in DC, a council member is proposing balcony legislation as part of a larger interconnection package to be introduced this month. And we still are finalizing the language on that as well. So this entire area might see, and I'm focusing on the legislation because it's very important and it directly impacts how you as an end user or consumer are going to interact with this product. One is because it's basically going to make it so you don't need to tell your utility about this. There's no requirement coming forward in laws to even have a notification process. So if these bills pass in each one of these states, the very next day, you'll be able to install one of these systems as long as it's less than 1.2 kilowatts in your house, and you are not going to have to notify the utility, and you will not have to pay for interconnection fees. And you won't have to go through all of the inspection process that utilities typically require, or a bidirectional meter or anything else. So that's automatically going to get rid of so many soft costs. It could reduce costs of these systems up to 50% in any state that passes this. And then one thing that we're looking at now with our model legislation is, in some states are uptaking, is also how we can make permitting at a city level as easy as possible, or to exempt from permitting in certain cases. And one of the things that we are also pushing forward, and that is important to know, is and how much bill language is coming out, is that we want these systems to be to permit backfeeding. So some people have this question a lot: is does plug-in solar need to be zero export, zero backfeed into the grid? That's not the case. I mean, for us to really make this as easy as possible, we want this to be uncompensated small-scale backfeeding. Because of the size of the systems, we don't anticipate that you will lose so much electricity back to the grid, because your house will probably use the most of it, especially compared to the battery. But it's kind of a win-win for the consumer, who doesn't have to notify or coordinate with the utility, but then the utility also can get some free electricity that they don't need to compensate through net metering agreement. And so I think this is kind of what we're trying to accomplish in each state, which is really what is making these systems come forward. And some big news that happened in December is that we finally have an underwriter laboratory certification for these systems. So UL, Underwriter Laboratory, is basically a main laboratory that certifies and provides the safety standards for systems in the US. And one of the big things that was preventing mass rollout of this last year was that there was no Underwriter Laboratory system certification for the entire plug-in solar system. So each of the components had a certification, but not in its entirety as a system. And now that's been published in December. And we're super excited about that, because it basically paves an exact way forward. That was the last piece of the puzzle. And it's exactly timely because this came out right before the 2026 legislative session. In most states, the legislation is requiring that the systems be UL certified. Now that there's a direct pathway for that. And one of the other things that we've seen last year is just how much public awareness has built around balcony solar, around plug-in solar. It's been covered everywhere, and people are demanding this. And when we're, as a small NGO, we're getting emails and messages from all over the country, people who say, I want this now. I need this. I can't get rooftop. And for those who might be asking, like, okay, how do I get this right now? It's still early days. And what we've had to do is really to work with manufacturers to even convince them to give us some systems to start piloting. And what we're discussing now, there's two manufacturers who are already selling these on the market in the US, and one of them only sells in Utah. And there's no major installers operating in space yet. And so that's kind of where Bright Saver has been coming in to fill that gap. And the way that we're expanding this across the US is really linking plug-in solar to low-income assistance programs, and trying to see how this can actually be a better alternative in some ways to rooftop, or and what a lot of cities have told me is it's just not enough community solar to go around. And so this is a great complement to other initiatives on solar access that we think, getting these pilots on the ground in the first place and seeing how this can be applied, especially in low-income settings for people who are underserved, is really important to us. And I won't go into too much detail on this unless you have questions, but I'll send the presentation around so that you have it. But this is kind of what the safety certification sets out for these new systems, which really addresses two fundamental safety concerns. One is the electric shock risk, which now puts forward very clear compliance mechanisms that the manufacturer can show, and also fires from overloaded wiring. And all of this is to say that we're very excited about this, because it at least gets rid of the gray area. And one thing just to take into account is what it does do is make the full DIY pathway a slightly less direct in the short term. So in Europe, I mean, IKEA just launched a big product line of these, and people are able to just go to the store and buy these. Because this UL certification new, it's intentionally conservative. UL always starts a bit more conservative because it was started as a mechanism for insurance companies to be able to have 100% certainty that they can cover something. So at the current moment, just something to take into mind over this year as we see more systems come out is that there will need to be some minor electrical work to get larger systems up and running, specifically on a dedicated circuit. And one thing that we are trying to push in a lot of states is that there is going to be a self-install option for very small systems. These are like microsystems that are less than 391 watts. And so what we probably will see over the course of this year is 10 plus manufacturers entering in with different system sizes, some that are a bit more DIY than others. And for people who want a larger system to offset more electricity, they may have to make a short first-time investment for 1 to 3 hours of electrical work. But we think that as more data comes out and more systems are deployed on the ground, and we have a next generation of products to come forward, we also see this UL certification and safety be revised according to real world data and statistics. So just to finish here, and then I want to take time for some questions, is just we anticipate a lot more uptake this year. We anticipate that there will be a lot more manufacturer availability in some states. For us, it's also about getting as many pilots on the ground as possible, especially in different operating contexts with low-income households, with people who live in disaster-prone areas, and tribal communities and other locations that have been traditionally excluded from the clean energy transition. And we do think that because of the expiring tax credits, that there can be a lot of interest from this for consumers who may not see rooftop solar as an option anymore. So, and of course, the bills are the first step. I mean, these are a lot of the future market enablement needs that we see. And we'd love to work with all of you, with NGOs, with city officials, with state officials, to try to see all of these things forward, and especially about educating consumers more and rolling out more trainings for industry experts and for public officials so that they can learn about this. And also seeing how we can make other dynamics like city level permitting and as simple as possible so that we can really reduce any red tape. So I'll stop there. I would love to hear any comments, and thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Mark. I just want to say that while you were presenting, you have unchained an amazing, there's been so much conversation in the chat, and this is exactly what we were hoping would happen. People becoming aware of legislation being on the table in their states and being able to work across different different cities and states and to support. And so thank you so much for presenting. Please, all of you in the chat, please add the information to the main doc so that people can refer back to it even after the chat will no longer be available. And open up to questions. I see one from Bob.
Thanks, Vanessa. Thanks, Mark, very much for the presentation. As elected coaches, we are very excited about this. And in particular, high electricity rates are a real obstacle to electrification. And so anything we can do to, and of course, we need more electricity, as you said. You addressed, I'm getting feedback somewhere. You addressed 3 of my questions partially, but I just want to clarify them. So first of all, on the sending electricity back to the grid, your point is that will be allowed but not compensated for. Is that correct?
Yes, some minor backfeeding. And like I mentioned, I think that the amount of backfeed you'll see is quite negligible because your house will probably use most of what's being generated in the first place. And especially if you pair with a battery, then during the night when there's no longer sun exposure, you can draw from the battery system as well. Yeah.
Right. And you also talked about the safety standards. And that is one of the things I did want to highlight, that your website does indicate it needs to be a dedicated outlet and a GFCI as well. And if it's outdoors and not protected, then it has to be an outdoor rated plug. And so as long as that pertains, that's going to be an obstacle for renters because they can't have that done themselves. And it may be difficult to do depending upon the physical layout. So can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think for the renter side, and that's why some states, I don't think that any of your three are introducing language already to address the renters' rights issue. It's just basically like that landlords have to make the within reason accommodations for people to be able to access these. And for us, I think it might be a second stage after I mean, the biggest hurdle really about mass uptake is the utility interconnection process. Once we get that addressed, I think then we have to look at all of the other variables that are preventing mass outreach. And one of the things that we're doing for pilots in places like Vermont or Colorado or Washington is that we're going directly to the homeowners association or the property managers first and kind of explaining this and why it's beneficial to them, and getting their green light in order to do a pilot. And that's been really helpful. But I think that we'll have to also explore options and programming at a local level on how to get landlords and property managers on board with this, because we do think that's an additional burden that can pop up, and it's really location based too in terms of who you're working with.
Mark, if you could go on mute when people ask their questions, I believe the
Sure.
feedback is from your computer. Thank you.
All right. Sounds good.
So just to clarify, the reasonable accommodations for renters, would that include the landlord having to install a new outlet, perhaps at the renter's expense, or how would that work?
So the outlet installation is pretty simple. I mean, that is minor electrical work that can take an hour, and that would be as included as cost of the system. So the renter would cover this if they want to purchase the system, and then it would just be about coming in, putting that proprietary outlet. If there's already a dedicated circuit, then really the only thing you have to do is change the outlet out. And a lot of, especially newer builds, have that dedicated circuit. If it's not, then the two kind of main things, unless it's less than 391 watts, which then you can kind of plug into anything, you'll have to get that dedicated circuit set up and have the proprietary outlet installed. But I would say that's being at the renter's expense if they're interested in purchasing a system. On the other hand, there's also associations or property managers who are interested in installing those and being the owners, but also reducing electricity on their buildings. And so I think there's a business case also to sell this to to the property managers themselves and see how they can save money with distributing these systems to their tenants.
Thanks for clarifying that. Thank you.
And we have three more questions. It looks like Kiefer, Francis, and then Jeffrey. Raise your hands in that order. So Kiefer, if you want to go ahead and come off mute.
Great, thank you. I was wondering about the potential for adding this to an existing rooftop system. I would guess that the utility might, see that as a violation of the interconnection agreement. And you might run into issues there, but probably electrically wouldn't be so much of an issue. I was just wondering if you looked at this at all or had any experience with it.
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity for people with existing rooftop solar. We have a program in California. It's a pilot program for net metering expansion. California utilities allow for you to add up to 10% or 1 kilowatt of additional solar on your house without changing your interconnection agreement. And so we have seen people adding plug-in solar systems to their rooftop array, especially places where they've purchased an electric vehicle or they've electrified additional appliances and they have more electricity usage. Now their rooftop system doesn't cover all of their needs anymore. So it's not just for people who are 100% excluded from solar. This is definitely an applicable case for that. And they've, at this point, we haven't seen any issues with combining these two systems. It'll take from whatever the plug-in solar system is producing first and then compensated by the rooftop system. And some people can see almost zero demand from the grid.
So then probably it's just a question of whether that gets included in legislative efforts, state by state basis.
Yeah, I think that's going to be another gray area that comes up, especially if it's you have a plug-in solar system combined with rooftop. But I would say that if you already have an interconnection agreement, then it's pretty streamlined, or it's going to be easier for you to add plug-in solar, even with the utility involved in that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And Mark's email is also in the notes too. So if you have follow-up questions, please reach out to him. But we only have 3 minutes left. We have 2 people with questions. So please try to keep it 1 question. If you have follow-up, please contact Mark offline. Francis, you're next.
Francis, you're muted. Yes.
Yeah, I just realized that. Thanks. Um, with the Maryland General Assembly session starting on Wednesday, bills are a very hot topic of discussion. And talking with various folks about the Affordable Solar Act, the only thing that came up as possible opposition is there's concern that the utilities will push back on safety. Now, in that discussion, nobody realized that the UL approval had come through. Is there anything else that we need to be telling people to deal with that safety issue, whether it's real or not, that the utilities may be bringing up?
Yeah, I think now with UL 3700, there's not a lot of space for utility pushback. That was perhaps an existing, but what they've been doing in the bills and how they got around this in Utah is involving the utilities from the very beginning and making sure that their concerns were addressed. And their concern, one was like not being liable at all for anything that could happen to the end user. And so that was included in the Utah bill language. And the second is that any systems that are installed are UL certified. And those, I think, are the two biggest things. All of the systems, even the ones that exist now that are being updated to UL 3700, are already UL 1741 certified, which means that they have anti-islanding mechanisms. So there's no risk of electricity being fed back into the grid during an outage, for example. And so that's one of the things that utilities have mentioned is like risk to line workers, but these products are already designed to shut off whenever there's a disruption detected from the AC current from the grid. So I think those are kind of the three big elements that they've mentioned. In addition to impact on the grids, but really what we have seen modeling this out, even in a large scale uptake context, is even if 25% of households in Massachusetts, for example, got plug-in solar systems, it would not affect grid predictability or stability that the utility needs to operate. So I think all of these concerns are being addressed quite rapidly by different expert committees as well, which is good news.
Great, thank you.
And just real quick from my end, I worked with DC Housing Authority for a couple of years, and I want to know, had you all worked with any housing authorities? And coming back to what Bob said about being able to plug in outside, these are a lot of older units. So how have you guys worked with them?
Yeah, in a few states. In Utah and in New Orleans, we are looking at pre-outfitting new public housing builds to be plug and solar ready, which I think is a huge opportunity. Because also, if the electrical work is already contemplated during the building process, then that means that these could be plug and play for renters. Then in other states like Boston, we're talking Boston Housing Authority, who's interested in this, and their thing is more about how to incentivize it because in some states, residents don't pay their electricity costs directly. And a key kind of drawing point is also the resiliency component because people can use these systems to get electricity even during an outage and charge their key needs. So I think that for rolling out in public housing and especially for building is that it's going to case by case basis, looking at what the building electrical wiring stability is on day one and seeing what modifications are going to be needed. But like I said, with 391 watt subsystems, even for older households or older wiring, there's risk is super low, if not none. And we haven't seen from any of the years that these systems are installed in Germany any safety concerns. But what will be important for people in public housing who want to roll this out is, or in housing authorities in general, is just making sure that what is stipulated in UL 3700, like having a dedicated circuit and a proprietary plug, is being complied with. And at that point, then you can have the certainty that this is safe for everybody around them. I don't know if that's your question. I'm trying to go quickly too.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You can send more emails and then I can also have like technical colleagues elaborate something even better worded than what I'm giving you.
No, I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're over time, but this was such an important conversation to have. Thank you all for joining this monthly meeting of the Electrify DMV Network. We look forward to seeing you next month. And in the meantime, please address any questions or look for support on the Google group or email Elizabeth if you are not on that yet. Thank you all. Bye. Happy New Year.
Thank you, everyone.